So thank you, everybody, for attending, and thanks to the Power BI Ideas and Power Break team for giving me the opportunity to present. So we're going to talk about some kind of fairly simple principles from a data visualization perspective. But before we do that, it's kind of to think of some things prior to that. So to visually communicate insights, we have some simple goals. So the visual processing should be simple and obvious. So that means when somebody's actually looking at one of your reports or dashboards, they should be able to quickly understand exactly what it's telling them, and they should also be able to understand whether it's good or bad, or whether it is indifferent. So it's something what the termed a low cognitive load. If you have to look at a particular visual or a dashboard or a report for a long time before you really understand it, then probably it's missed the mark from its primary goal, effectively. And once the kind of visual processing is done, then the insights should be easy to understand and derive. So it should be easy be able to spot trends or patterns, or actually have the ability to kind of to slice and dice and filter to actually drive towards bringing out some insights. And what the other thing is really important as well is the user experience, right? So making it intuitive and enjoyable. It shouldn't be difficult to use. It is very much a almost like a web app, if you want to kind of consider it that, and it should be fairly intuitive. And the other thing is, if you want to, we're aiming to have a high level of adoption of the reports and dashboards that we develop. We want our customers to like them. We want them to use them. And for that, we need to make them visually appealing, easy to use, and insightful, which is just a summary of the other points. So introduce a simple set of principles. And we're going to have a look at some of those features in Power BI, and we may talk about some of them just in points, but also, we do have some examples of good and bad, images of each, effectively. So there's anybody who's been around in data visualization for a while will know there's a lot of material generally available, right? There's people publishing books on a regular basis. There's lots of, PhD type papers and everything else around data visualization. And there's a few industry luminaries, if you like, who do a lot on social media as well. And there's lots of opinions about how to do things right, how not to do things, what you should include, what you should exclude. And often you kind of think, well, where do you start really? So I think that, in my opinion, I have to say that is my opinion, right? So it can be simplified into an easy to remember set of guiding principles. I think I've read several books, and a lot of them come across with the same kind of ideas. And when you actually think about it, it does break down to be a fairly simple process. And also, I like a bit of alliteration, right? Who doesn't? Hence the 6 C's of data visualization. All right, so the first one, consistent, and we'll go into each one in more detail. Clean, clear, context, creative, and call to action. So if you kind of think about those 6 things, again, it should be easy to remember, and that's why the alliteration comes in handy as well. While you're kind of developing reports and dashboards, it's definitely going to help you on your journey as you move towards doing more complex reports and visualizations as well. So let's start off with consistent, right? Okay, so be consistent with everything. And there's except, because there always is an except. So page layouts and visual encoding, I think that once you actually start to develop a high number of reports and dashboards, you want to make sure your pages have a similar layout so that when people are shifting between reports, they can instantly, again, that cognitive load is reduced. Visual encoding, so how do we actually show certain insights or certain stories? Make sure that's fairly consistent as well. Colors, be consistent with the colors, right? So see dashboards where you have different colors for different categories, for the same categories even. There's no real kind of consistency in calling things out. and it just makes it even more difficult for the actual user to process. Fonts, in particular, type size and weight, really important that they're consistent. Buttons and navigation. Again, we do have the ability to have buttons and navigation within Power BI and within other dashboard tools as well. Make those consistent. If somebody presses a back button, they're going to expect to go back a page. If somebody presses a button to actually move to the next page, they want to move to the next page. So again, just make it kind of consistent and easy. And then more kind of under the hood effectively, or when you're actually designing, right, the metadata and the semantic model. So be consistent with table names, column names, and measure names. Again, it just starts to promote familiarity with your users, and they'll get used to using those things. It should also be in the language of the business as well, right? So if you call something revenue within the business, call your measure names revenue, right? Don't call them sales or something else. Call it revenue. And just a few other gotchas there. So be consistent with everything if you can, right? So there might be some things that are decided for you where you can't get that level of consistency. And then talking about colors, that could be a whole session in itself, right? Just and it could be a whole day talking about how to use color, when to use color, when not to use color, and so on as well. So a lot of that is already decided for us. So depending on whether we're doing consultancy with other clients, whether we work with an employer, a lot of those things we already decided by the corporate or marketing teams. There is already a corporate color palette that you have to use for these kind of things. So often we don't get a choice to use which colors, but when we do, then there's lots of choice there. So I'm just going to switch over to Power BI, and it's going to be easier if I do this in the service, I think. So the first thing we'll look at is consistent, right? So here's kind of a couple of examples of some what is not consistent, right? So we've got two bar charts here. They're showing the same thing, but they look very, very different. We've got different font sizes, different for different purposes. We're calling one revenue by category and one sales by product groups. They're two different things. Again, that's just going back to consistency in the naming. The colors are all different. You can see that smartphones on the lower one is purple, and the smartphones on the top is that kind of teal color. And I may have over exaggerated this to drive the point home, but with lots of colors. But I think you get the idea that it doesn't look good, because if I see smartphones on a visual in that teal color, if I see smartphones elsewhere on the page or elsewhere in the report, I expect it to have the same color attributed to it. So I don't want to kind of see different colors for the same thing, because I'm going to instantly connect the smartphone to that color in my brain as I go through the different pages. So kind of moving on from that, a better example, right, is where we just have a single color for the categories. We don't necessarily need lots of different colors, and often, again, going back to that low cognitive load, if I did have using a lot of those different colors, I'd have to have a legend somewhere, and that means that someone's got to read the legend, figure out which color means which, and so on, and other things that might go along with that. So keeping it kind of fairly simple definitely helps. So we switched now from kind of being a myriad of colors, inconsistencies in the font styles, the weights, and the sizes, to at least we may still have different sizes, but all of our titles with the same, all of our visual titles with the same size, the axes, values, and titles with the same size as well. So we've shifted now into something which is a bit more consistent. All right, so how do we do that in Power BI? So I'm not maybe going to demo everything. Oops, with this one. So there's a few things we can use, right? So for those of you who are familiar, we've got themes, which are available from the ribbon. So if we go into Power BI Desktop, we do have the ability to actually switch to the view there, and then we've got various themes that are already pre-built, and I can just select one of these themes or I can actually start to customize the current theme as well. So I can change that, and that is now, it's a much easier experience. In the last, it was changed maybe 5-6 months ago. It's a much better experience now to actually be able to change the theme and to suit your needs. Previously, there was some things which were available from, and they still are, right? So there is the customer themes are stored in a JSON file, which defines the color palette attributes, generally on specific visuals. And there's also a tool on Power BI.tips, if anybody hasn't been there, which will generate the standard JSON themes if those standard Power BI ones don't suit. The other important thing is use templates. So anybody who hasn't used templates previously, if we in Power BI Desktop again, we can export our report to a Power BI template. And what that means is that template file will be much smaller than the PBIX file, but it will contain the theme already. You can design and style consistency for different clients and different business units. So we have a library of different themes basically, which are suitable for different business units because they have their own likes and dislikes from a visual point of view, common page layout and styles, metadata for queries and data sources. So within the actual template as well, you can also have in there definitions for what the data sources, and things like if you have a calendar and Power Query, that can already be in a template as well. And you can really use those to accelerate development. So that's really useful. All right, so I'm not going to demonstrate any of those things. I'm assuming that most people know how to use those. But if we really need to, I can. Okay, so the next one that I want to talk about is something called clean. Okay, so this is the next one. So this is where we'll declutter visuals, right? So things like borders, grid lines, axis titles, they can all go, right? Unless they're absolutely needed, right? So sometimes you do need axis titles, but on a lot of visuals, if you're using the right visual for the right kind of insight, and the visual title should be enough to understand easily exactly what's being shown. Use backgrounds where it makes sense. So if you have, again, a certain design style, use a background. It can help you rather than moving things around on the actual canvas. If you use a background, everything's already in one place. And don't place too much information on one page. Usually 4 to 6 visuals are sufficient, depending on the insights. And you'll also find that, again, going back to the low cognitive load, if I have more than that many visuals on one page or in one part of the screen that I'm viewing, then that becomes quite difficult for me to actually process and view, right? So reducing the number of visuals reduces that cognitive load, but it can also actually improve performance as well. Only keep what is essential to the page or visual. Align everything. Again, there's a gotcha on that one. Keep the white space equal between visuals if you can. So, although you can have multiple visuals on one page, you don't want them having, again, it's all about that kind of cognitive load and the visual acuity. People will just see that things are either together or they're not, if that white space is equal between the visuals. And generally will flow from left to right, top to bottom. Of course, that depends on geographic and cultural needs and who the audience is, but for a lot of the work that we would be doing, it would be from left to right and top to bottom. And just align everything from a consistency point of view using backgrounds. The other advantage there is that there's fewer visual elements on the actual canvas, which will help improve performance as well. There's been a couple of good blog posts recently about how much of a difference that can make. And then obviously, the aligning everything, unless there's something you specifically want to call out, right? So if you want to place one visual at the top right, so everybody look over there straight away, on the top left, then do that, because that might be the most important thing or the most important part of the story that you're trying to tell. Okay, so let's just switch back to the service, and we'll talk some more examples as well. So the way this works is it works through with one visual effectively, and we will process all of the we'll kind of examine that visual underneath each of the 6 C's effectively to see just how that journey develops. So this is for our previous one where we went from a consistent one with lots of horrible colors. So it's not necessarily a bad example of this, but if we look at a different example, you'll now see that there is a difference there, right? So that we've removed the border around the visual, so my eyes aren't drawn to the border, my eyes are just drawn to the actual title first. Then I'm looking at the category labels and I'm looking at the values, right? And because I've removed the axes, the x axes, and then the titles of both of those, and I've added in data labels on the actual visuals, then I don't really need to have the axes on there because I can just look at that. I can understand this is revenue by category. This is the category here, and this is the revenue. I don't need to see, another axis on there because I can see already, and it's sorted in the right way by largest to smallest, which is for this particular visual is a thing that I really want to look at. So now we've applied some of those things from a clean perspective. We've decluttered it, and if we had multiple visuals on one page, then we would have all of those lined up as well. All right, so let's just go back now to the deck again. So how can we do clean in Power BI, right? So there is a display grid and snap to grid options when developing. I don't know if anybody uses that, but it can be quite useful. Enable the smart guides in the Power BI options, themes and templates as well, and again will help you get things clean. Get one visual right and copy and paste is always our friend, right? So, and then format painter as well. And we can use the format align options, like align to top, distribute horizontally, and so on. And that that does make a difference. It helps you get things lined up properly. Now, some of you may or may not know this, but the display to grid, the snap to grid don't always help. But if you use the arrow keys, that will move the visual 1 pixel, and if you shift an arrow key, it will move it 10 pixels in the direction of the arrow key. I'm not going to do it on this one because this is, oh, maybe I can. It's not going to really make any difference. So if I look at this, if I select the visual, I'm doing up arrow here, which obviously you can't see particularly well because my camera's not pointing at that, but you can see the visual moving very slightly. And if I do shift and up, it moves in a bigger block as well. So and the guidelines that we talked about were, so when you move the visual, you see the red lines appear, very much like PowerPoint. Then that means it's in the right kind of position. And this is all in the options. Okay, so if you look at in the view, you can turn on the grid lines there, and you can snap to grid, but sometimes that doesn't help. But having the grid lines on might help as well. And then if you actually want to have the red lines on there, then you need to go into options settings and turn on for the report. There's a global setting for report settings, which is display smart guides when visuals are aligned. So if anybody hasn't had those turned on, I would definitely recommend turning those on because it does help a lot. Okay, so back to the presentation. So we'll talk a little bit about clear. So the next thing then is, once we kind of cleaned our visual up, we want to make sure it's clear. So we'll ensure the information is accurate. Obviously, really important. Use the right visual for the right message or insight. Again, we don't want to see people choosing the wrong visuals for different kind of insights. You would still be surprised how many people produce visuals for Categorical values trying to use line charts and so on, it just doesn't suit. They should definitely be used more for kind of time-based things. Be specific on what the visual's intended to show. So use a visual title. So for example, revenue year to date rather than just revenue. Again, it's just kind of driving home that clarity message. Using the right measure and data formatting. When you're dealing with big numbers, often it can be difficult to get those things onto the visuals in a neat way. So you may decide to actually use the next measure unit up or the next display unit. It might go from millions to something else, but then just be kind of clear. Be careful on how that's actually formatted. Again, kind of being specific, make sure that the users are not confused by what or how something is shown. Generally, the visual interaction should be set to filter rather than cross highlight. I think that's the preferred in most cases. It may not always suit, but certainly for pretty much every report that I produce and the team produces, we always go for the filter method just because it's much easier. And it shows you things very clearly, whereas cross highlighting isn't always like that. So again, kind of moving on from our previous examples, this is our one where we've now got a clean visual without the borders and everything else. So we're going to make just a very small change here, right? So we made a couple of changes. So basically, we changed this to revenue millions by product category, just in case anybody didn't understand what the M was for, right? So most people should, and particularly the business users who are viewing this, but they may not always be aware of that. And also changed the display, the decimal places, slightly as well. So now you see this is 5.2 million here, and that's because we had it's set to just one decimal place. Changing it to 2 means we'll actually see that it's actually 5.18 million, and that's quite a difference between 5.2 and 5.18 million. So I'd be happy with that difference for sure. But when things round up, just be a little bit careful when you're doing that, and make sure you're picking the right display units on there as well. So moving on to the next one then, which is kind of important as well. So actually, let's talk about how we can achieve some clear things with Power BI first. So, and this may sound a little bit strange, but if you're not doing this, then you should get into the habit of doing these things. And it's not always easy. I know that. I've tried testing them lots of times, but our first point on being clear was making sure the information is accurate, and that means we've got to really unit test things like Power Query custom columns and measures, right? So that we want to be sure that we're doing the right kind of thing with the revenue or with the profit or any measure or anything that we're calculating which doesn't exist in the source data already. We've got to do, individual, I'm going to call them unit tests for that, but it may just be as simple as comparing that to the report that the business used to previously get, or somebody will say, no, our figures for the end of the quarter, the end of the month, are a certain value, must match that. Then that's how you'll be doing the unit testing, making sure that the values match, and then you can be fairly confident that the calculations are correct. And there's lots of other ways you can do that as well. You can kind of obviously, in tools like DAX Studio and things, you've got certain options in there to understand exactly what's going on from a DAX perspective. And as we saw in the other things, so set the data types and display formats correctly, particularly for date, currency, decimal, and whole number data types. Dates, particularly just because of the screen real estate, you don't really want the really long dates that seem to be defaulted or defaults to your locale settings. You might want to just show date and month, or maybe even just month and year, right? So again, just format them correctly. Rounding on visuals, as I said, as we saw on the other one, 5.2 million is very different to 5.18 million. So check the display units, make sure they're correct, and then the value decimal place settings as well. The title of the visual references the information displayed. Again, that's one of the changes that we made just to make things really clear. And then use the right visual for the right insight or story, right? So, and again, that's not always easy to do. And there's a couple of places that I would normally look at. So you got there's a great visual vocabulary which Financial Times have produced. If anybody hasn't seen it, I would recommend going and have a look at that. And then a guy called SQL Jason, I think, Jason Thomas, did something very similar for Power BI as well. So it shows you different visuals in Power BI for, all the different, I want to show trends over time, share of the whole, correlation between values, all those different kind of things. It shows you which visuals to use in Power BI. And SQL BI have produced a visuals reference as well. I'm sure there's another one knocking around as well, which is from McCaw, I think, which is also pretty good. So that's just making sure that we can actually use those, have an understanding of the right visual to use for the right insight. All right. So the next thing we'll talk a little bit about is context. And this, again, like colors, a lot to think about here. You could almost have a separate session on context itself, right? So, but generally we want to start out with, what is the story I want to tell or the problem that I want to try and help the business solve? We need to start out with a particular, whether it be a problem statement or I need to understand something, or we know that there is an issue, then we need to actually build our report or dashboard around that context. If somebody wants to understand why we've seen a sudden increase in service desk tickets or why we've seen a sudden decrease in number of new people that are registered for a service, there's no point in having things which are not necessarily either relevant to that or driving that either. So that's really the first thing to think about is what's the story you want to tell, probably want to solve. Who's the audience, right? So who's going to be using this report or dashboard? How will they consume it? Will they be using it on a mobile? Will they be using just a normal the Power BI service? Maybe even it might be embedded, right? So it might be Power BI embedded type scenario. And they could be consuming it in a slightly different way. They could be consuming it in Teams, SharePoint, all the other places where you can actually consume Power BI content. So again, just thinking about who are you creating a report for, and how are they going to consume it will also help you make some design decisions, if you like, because you know that certain things may not work so well on mobile, so therefore that might make you change some ideas around how you want to use certain visuals and how you actually lay those visuals out. Accessibility, it's important to consider. You need to make the reports accessible for other people. There are methods to be able to do that, and we'll cover a little bit of that in the next slide. Grouping common information together. So there's something called Gestalt principles, which is around kind of UI and what the brain does basically when it sees something visually. About it joins things together, it colors, it fills in the blanks. All those different kind of things are related to the Gestalt principles. So think about maybe some of those as well when you're actually putting the information onto a report or a dashboard and keeping things together. And that supports the analysis, and again, easier to understand and reduces that cognitive load. Call out exactly what is being displayed and how it is measured. Again, part of the visual title. Enable the user to drive their own analysis. It gives them the options to drill and slice, right? And various things to actually drive their own analysis. Give the user insight to what's good or bad, trends, comparisons with previous values. So if there's other things around, visualization, which is it's like, so what, right? So my revenue is 3 million this year. Well, so what? What does that mean? Really, it doesn't really mean anything. Um, and compared to what as well? So are you comparing your revenue to a target, or to the same period last year, or in the same period the year before even? So all those things which are really from a context point of view to help the user understand, are things improving or are they declining, right? So again, that's the so what and the compared to what aspect of that. So just kind of looking at, then we've got a couple of examples of context in the service. So again, rolling on from our previous visual, okay, we thought we had it about right. But now when we actually look further into it, we make a couple of slight changes here. Okay, so we want this to be a year to date, right? So now we've changed the title of that to be revenue year to date, revenue in millions year to date by product category, because previously I don't know in what context this revenue is. Right? Is that for a year? Is it for 5 years? Is it for all time? I don't know. Right. So, but it just changed one small change here to the title instantly tells me, yeah, I'm looking at year-to-date figures for the product categories. And then adding additional context, if I hover over some of these now, we can start using things like visual tooltips to actually reveal more context without necessarily making things more complex to process visually, but just they know that that ability is there to actually to hover over that visual, and there will be either a standard tooltip or a visual tooltip. And as I scroll through each of these, I can see that all of these are the revenue trend is negative compared year over year. And with this one is positive for tablets, and this one is, all of these are negative as well, right? So so I can do that. So we can go some stages further than that, right, to kind of bring that message out more clearly, because that might be something that's really important to the business to understand which of these categories where my year-to-date revenue for this particular year is less than my year-to-date revenue for last year. Right? That might be a fairly simple measure or a comparison, but again, just bring that out. So we bring our other visual out, so that's the same as the previous one. And as it evolves, now we can add some more context. Okay, so now we call out basically that there's something different about this visual, something different about this particular category, and instantly my eyes will be drawn to that, right? So I don't really, well, I may care about the rest of them, right? But that's the one I want to focus on. So this is the one where the revenue trend is positive, and all the rest of them are negative. All right. So, and I've probably broken one of my own rules here, because it's not immediately obvious that the blue is positive year over year trend and the grey is negative year over year trend, right? So that may not have been immediately obvious. It's only when I hover over that we do that. So, but we'll fix that in one of the next visuals. So you can see as my kind of visuals evolve, I'm just looking at one specific visual here. It's changed quite a lot from where we started to where we've got to now, and I've just applied some very simple kind of framework to this, thinking about, is it clean, consistent, clean, clear, have I got the right context? All right, so excuse me. So context. So how can we achieve that context? So we can organize the page and the visuals clearly, right? So that's kind of fairly obvious. We can use the alt text for each visual. So the alt text is really useful for people who may be visually impaired, and that will, if they're using things like screen readers, it will actually verbally call out what the visual is showing. Even just something as simple as making sure the tab order is correct. Some people prefer to use keyboards than mice, strangely enough, but it is possible. So if you have the tab order correct, again, it's just really easy to do things like that. The right visual for the right story or the right insight again. And always make sure that the titles, the page, and the visual help clarify the context. Group similar things together, so revenue and profit as an example, and use shapes or backgrounds to indicate that they belong together. Comparisons and trends, so use the same visuals where appropriate. So if I'm comparing my trend of one particular metric versus a trend of another metric, I will either want them in the same visual or I want to use the same visual to show that. So if I'm showing a line chart over time for one metric, I want to show this line chart over time for the other metric because, again, that's so what or compared to what. I need to see them being shown in within the same context to understand whether one is improving or one is better than the other and so on. Slices and filtering. So again, letting the user drive the report or the dashboard by giving that. Drill through filtering is really good because it allows the user to actually to look at something within the context of another value, and we'll see more of that when we come to the end. Visual tooltips, which we've already covered, and then measures and conditional formatting. So that using right measures, conditional formatting we saw was really powerful. It kind of we looked, your eye was drawn straight to that one blue bar immediately. You didn't know why it was blue, but your eyes was drawn to it. So we'll do just a little bit more. So in the service. So now we're fairly confident about just changing some of these visuals ourselves. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is, just because we've got that some of those principles, it doesn't mean to say that we can't be creative, right? So we can still be very creative. This is just an example of some dashboards being created by the team or reports, very kind of simple stuff, but you can see that they are very different styles, right? And we use different visuals for different purposes. We did some analysis on the Japanese insurance market as an example, and we just showed some trends here, but we wanted to separate those out. One was about growth, and then one was about a policy growth, and one was demographics, but we put all the demographics in one particular visual just to show things like population growth, household growth, people per household, and things like that. So you can see that they're very different styles, right? And you can also see that, you don't have to using those principles doesn't mean to say that you're going to have boring reports or visuals. I guess that's what I was trying to say, right? So you can still do an awful lot with those things. So and again, just kind of going back on that, then creative, everyone's view of visually appealing is different. And you develop your own style, right? But if you kind of just use some of those fairly simple things to think about, it will certainly help you start out on your journey and make sure that your end user is being presented with the right information in a nice, clear, and concise manner. If you need inspiration and ideas, check out the Power BI galleries, right? So there's data stories in there, there's various things in there, there's some brilliant examples of creativity when you look at it. Use of backgrounds, images, and so on. There is a lot to consider there, and it will give you some, let's say, inspiration and ideas as well. Don't feel constrained by the ideas today as well. So kind of they just to be a guide, but it's how you can think about some of the things that you want to do, right? So and then as we go on to the last slide, right? So this is call to action. And I might have cheated a bit on this one, right? But I needed something that began with a C to make 6 of them. But maybe I could have left it as 5. I could have even made it 7, actually. I had another one to use. But I left it at 6. So what do we mean by call to action? I'm sure we're all familiar with the phrase actionable insights, right? So, your report and dashboard should enable your stakeholders to see those insights, right? Perform their own analysis, perhaps. If you're not calling the insights out clearly, do some of their own analysis, filtering, drill through all those different kind of things. And from those insights, then the stakeholders can make informed decisions and take action, right? Actionable insights. So it's really important that, you know, again, we can make our dashboards look beautiful and reports look beautiful. The users really love using them. But if we're not really delivering that kind of actionable insight, there's no real call to action there. So again, that will harm adoption because people will just say, well, it's not really allowing me to to get to the data that I want to make the decisions that I need to make. And as you start to gain experience, either within the business unit or with different clients, if you're more in a consultancy model, you'll start to actually suggest specific actions, right, or guide your users in a certain direction. And that comes with business experience, business knowledge of the specific problem. All right, so that finishes that little bit. So now when we kind of get to a point where there's no point in doing this if we don't bring it all together, right? So then when we actually start looking at some of these visuals that we brought together, and this is, again, some of those things we can look at some of the things that have been done here. So, we see that we're measuring revenue trends year over year and profit trends year over year. There's a title here which clearly tells me that if profits are increasing, it's that blue color. If it's decreasing, there it's gray, right? So, again, looking at my revenue trend year over year, I'm down 407,000 or nearly 4%, and my profit is also down. But I can see that in different dimensions, right? So I can see that if I look at the product category, I can see here the scale of that that year over year difference is biggest on laptops. Okay, so that is it's the biggest gray bar. And if I look at the profit, then I'm comparing year over year. I'm down on the biggest thing is to do with smartphones, right? So they're two areas that I probably want to have a look at. And in fact, both laptops and smartphones are. My revenue is down compared to last year. My profit is also down quite a lot compared to last year as well. So that's definitely something that I want to drill further into. And then if I look at a slightly different one here, so I've got by different sales channels that we use, I can see that the wholesale sales channel from a revenue point of view is where the biggest difference in year over year trend is. So it's negative. And it's the grey color. And I've obviously got just some kind of general trend here as well. And then the bottom, I've got the same for profit, right? So I've got the revenue is the three visuals at the top, and the profit is the three visuals at the bottom. And that just keeps those things together. I probably should have drawn or had a background that had some kind of outline around those so you can see that they should all be looked at in one thing. But it's fairly obvious that if you're going from top to bottom and left to right, I'm going to look at this is all to do with revenue and these are all to do with profit. Again, we've put in some additional things like, I can look at from a geographical point of view in my sales channels, whether on a country by country basis, how am I doing from a increasing or decreasing perspective. And on both of these, I can drill through. So let's go and look at laptops, right? And I want to see what my product category performance looks like. And I can drill into that and it will show me then again, what that looks like. I've added a little bit more color here so we can see from and I use this particular visual because a line chart often doesn't let you see how the change in rank is over time, whereas the ribbon chart does, and it's really good for that. So I can see that obviously 2020, it's kind of a bit up and down and very down, whereas 2019 was the top selling one. It dropped down, went back to the top, went down to the third, and then the top again. So it's always been in the top one or two for the whole year. Whereas in my in 2020, it's only been top selling for 2 of the months. So That's not as easy to see in a line chart, but it is quite easy to see in a ribbon chart. And again, I've got kind of different breakdowns here of looking at laptops only. Okay, so in my retail and franchisee sales channels, my year-over-year revenue is positive. In the rest of the sales channels is negative. So again, that's something that I might want to go and look at. And I've got a breakdown here by salespeople and so on. And then look at the products that we've sold. And I mainly did this just so I can actually use the select by rectangle, which is really cool. So that looked really good. And then I've got a similar breakdown by, I'm just going to go back one page, and a similar breakdown by the, let's just do web portal. Oops. Oh, I'm using a my laptop mouse here, and it's not behaving. Okay, so again, similar thing on the sales channel. I can see the change in rank as we look at the each year and months over months. Here I've got a slightly different breakdown. I wanted to see because it's related to sales channels, is there anything from a geographic point of view that's going on? So I can see there's only 4 countries here where my year-over-year revenue is actually positive. The difference of growth is positive. The rest of them are negative. And again, only for 2 of the different product categories is my sales there. So that gives me the opportunity to make some decisions. All right. So that's kind of pulling all those different things together. It looks like a fairly I'm biased, obviously, but I think it looks fairly clean. It's pretty clear what's going on. I can look at the visuals and understand what it's telling me from a decision point of view or a call to action. I can see where I want to focus on. I can see where my revenue is least growth. And that gives me, I can zoom into those and then start looking even deeper and start making decisions and taking actions and so on. So that pretty much wraps it up. So that's all. Just again, thanks for giving me the opportunity to present. And I hope there's a bit of time for some discussion and questions as well. So I will stop sharing and maybe we hand it over for if anybody has any questions or anything in the chat which I may have missed.
Yeah, I guess we have a question in the chat. Can report page tooltips work properly on Power BI mobile, or have we alternatives?
I thought there was, but I think it depends very much on the mobile OS that you're using, and I think it may not be possible to do it with just finger gestures. But if you have some mobile where you have a stylus or something similar, or a tablet, then maybe you can. I'm not 100% sure, I have to say, but it's a good question, no? Maybe we can look into that. But again, that might be something when if you know that your report is going to be consumed on mobile, and again, you know that page tooltips may not work or report page tooltips may not work on mobile, it might be something that you say, okay, I won't use any report page tooltips. I mean, maybe that's not the right thing to do, but I think the other thing is when you're developing on mobile, I mean, it just bundles all the visuals into that kind of right-hand pane for you to pull onto the mobile canvas. So I don't really think you would have the context of that tooltip necessarily on that visual. I mean, it would exist, but I don't develop an awful lot of stuff for mobile, so yeah, it may not. I think the only way you would do that would be if you pinned the report page, perhaps, then it would. But there's no kind of hover over gesture on a mobile. Maybe I'm overthinking it. I don't know.
Maybe you can test it. try and error. So if it not works, then and alternatives, I guess it are good alternatives. So maybe you can make a drill through to another page. So if you like to know more, or you can make a bookmark or something.
Yes.
So many possibilities in Power BI. So I guess.
I think now with the drill through buttons and things like that opens up a lot more possibilities. Because you actually just put a button on the page to drill through to something specific.
Yeah, right. I love the buttons for the drill through. I only work with them because it's more intuitive because nobody think about right click or visual.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, have we other questions, or have somebody else something to say about visualization in Power BI Desktop?
Yeah. Anybody else? Maybe everyone's.
So I discovered today that the text box is very annoying. So if you like to write
this is the AI.
Yeah,
they're using the same thing though, aren't they?
Yeah, you have the smart narrative new, and the same thing happened on the text box. So if you create a text box, this smart narrative overlay it, and you can't see your text anymore.
Oh, really?
That's really annoying. But Will Thompson had said it's a common error or fail,
Right.
and it's on the list. So in the next update, I guess we will have our normal text box back, hopefully.
Yep.
Yeah. So
and I sent you the presentation as well, so if you want to upload that somewhere or share it, then
we are a little bit behind, but we will share the whole content from all Power Breaks, also the videos and the presentations, but we are a little bit behind, so yeah.
No, everyone's busy.
Yeah. Have we other questions or?
The comments?
No, thank you, Gavin.